Hello everyone, welcome back to Powerful Nothing and Magic the Gathering Cube podcast. I'm your host Dan, and as always, I'm joined by James. James, how are you doing this week, my boy?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. How you doing?
I'm doing well. We have a fun topic for everyone this week. This week, we're going to be doing a bit of a level up episode. We're going to be diving and giving some tips for navigating a draft in any type of cube. Before we jump into our main topic, quick reminder, do remember to give the podcast a like, a thumbs up, all that good stuff greatly helps us out. Also, there will be time codes down in the show notes below, along with a card gallery if you want to see any card that we're talking about. And also, there'll be a link down to a video version if you're listening to this on your podcasting app. Right, but with that preamble out the way, let's jump into our main topic. So James, this is one I know that has a close place in your heart in terms of getting better at Cube and that kind of stuff. But give us a bit of an overview on the conversation that we're going to have today.
Yeah, so I think you get lots of really good content around draft advice for like booster drafts and stuff, right? But I think for Cube, it can be a little bit difficult to make that content because every cube is different, right? And that's why we love Cube. They're all really unique. They all require you to draft a little bit differently. But what we're going to try and talk about today is a few things you can look at, a few qualities in a cube which would make you adjust how you draft them, and try and give some sort of general guidelines on how you might change your drafting approach to suit the individual cube that you're drafting.
Yeah, so the way we're going to be talking about it is that kind of all cubes will fit somewhere on this spectrum. On like one side, you have like what we're going to define as high flexibility cubes, which are cubes that are generally just trying to run the most efficient spells possible. So a good example might be something like a pauper cube or something like a peasant cube. And if I'm honest, a lot of people's first cubes will probably fit into this category because when you're building a cube, often the first place you start is just putting all the good cards in the cube. And then as you iterate, you start adding things like packages and more build-arounds. These are cubes that run a lot of efficient cards and let you be quite flexible in what you're doing. There's a high quality and a high density of good cards. On the other end of the spectrum, you kind of have more synergy cubes where the builder wants you to kind of combine cards rather than just take the one efficient card and have that card shine for just being raw efficient.
Yeah, so I think the sort of key sort of characteristic here is that in the higher flexibility cubes really is that the majority of cards in these cubes are going to fit well in a bunch of different decks, right? They're not asking you to be in one very specific archetype or really build around one specific synergy. They're saying, hey, this is a good white card. It casts for 2 and a white, and if you can make 2 and a white, it'll probably be at least decent in your deck. There might be little packages of synergy you can use to make your cards a little bit better, but the sort of core of the cube is going to be around, efficient threats, interaction, card advantage, which are going to pivot really nicely between colors. And the reason we're saying that makes it higher flexibility is it gives you more flexibility in the draft, right? If you're halfway through pack 1 and you have a bunch of black cards, your black cards might be able to go in a blue-black deck or a red-black deck or a white-black deck. And that might be less true in a cube where your cards were much more honed in on specific archetypes and specific synergies.
Yeah, I think that makes a bunch of sense. But just like another good way of describing it is like in your more high flexibility, in your cubes with a higher flexibility that's running more efficient cards, they're going to run a card like Lightning Bolt in their red creature removal slot because it's 1 mana, it deals 3 damage to any target at instant speed, it's just good and efficient. A cube that's focusing more on synergy might go for something say it's doing goblins. It might run something like a goblin grenade. It's a single red for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast goblin grenade, sacrifice a goblin, and goblin grenade deals 5 damage to any target. So, from a raw efficiency point of view, Lightning Bolt is stronger. But in the synergy cube, if you have that extra level of synergy, goblin grenade is a more powerful card. Is a more powerful card, but you have to jump through that additional hoop of synergy. Is that a good way of describing it, James?
Yeah, exactly. And it's giving you that little bit less flexibility in the draft, right? Because by taking your Goblin Grenade, you're not just saying, I've got to be red for this card to be good. You're saying, I've got to be a Goblins deck. It's more narrow, it's more restrictive, so it gives you a little bit less room to pivot around in the draft.
Okay, awesome. So I think let's start on the efficiency side of things, James. Talk to me about navigating a draft in a cube with higher flexibility, which is a cube that's running more efficient spells and efficient threats.
Yeah, so in this sort of cube, at the start of the draft, your main priority should be finding the open colours, finding what colours are open in your seat, what the people around you aren't drafting. So in the first few picks, you're going to want to leave yourself pretty open, pretty flexible, and you're mostly going to want to prioritize taking the best card out of each of your first couple of packs. This is because you're not getting the signals of it during the first couple of picks, right? Obviously, your literal first pick, no one else has seen. You don't get any signals at all. Your second pick, even if there's a really good white card, there might have been an even better white card for the person passing to you took their first pick. That isn't a sign that white is open, really, right? So we're not reading signals yet. All we're doing is taking the best card out of the first couple of packs, because that's going to mean that whatever cover we pivot into, we've not passed something great for it, right? And we're giving ourselves options down the line.
Yeah, and I guess because these cubes are trying to run the best cards. Again, these are like the Mitgo Vintage cube. These are like your stock, like Pauper or Peasant cubes. I think in the notes, James, you mentioned the Agility cube that you drafted at Cube Clash being a good example of this. I think a question on that in terms of like those very early picks, I'm like, how are you defining the best card? Is it like the standalone strongest card, like the standalone most efficient at what it does? Or would you define it as a card that has the highest chance of making it into your final deck?
Yeah, great question. So in this sort of very high flexibility cube, right, if we're right up at that end of the spectrum, the strongest cards still give you flexibility, so they're almost the same thing. But when you get to something like Mitgo Vintage Cube, I'd say is not quite at that end of the spectrum, because yes, it does have a bunch of really powerful, efficient, flexible cards, but it also has a bunch of very synergistic cards, right? It also has a bunch of cards that go in very specific decks, right? Like Mox Opal, not a flexible card, for example, goes in one very specific archetype. But yeah, generally in this sort of cube, in the first couple of picks, you're looking to take the best sort of standalone card. You're not assuming you're going to have great synergies with your card, because that's not really what the cube's about. You're sort of picturing, okay, if I end up in some like middle of the road 15 creature mid-rangey deck, which of these cards is going to be great, right? And I'm not necessarily thinking about I'm going to be this exact color combination. I'm just thinking about, hey, this white card, if I just know that I'm in a white deck, how powerful is it going to be without any other information, right? Because that's giving me the most options down the line, right? If I take, say, a gold card or a card that only works in one archetype, then sure, maybe its ceiling's a little bit higher, but I'm also way less likely to play it, right?
And just out of interest, like, where do you put lands on your like flexibility scale of things, James? Because like take like a fetch land or something like a Prismatic Vista. Like it's very open ended. Which I guess kind of goes into what you were saying before?
Yeah, for sure. So this is fetch lands, and all the other lands are really in different categories here, in my mind. Because the fetch lands, if there's, a fetch, shockland, triome, mana base in the cube, the fetch lands are going to be good almost wherever you end up, right? Like, if you first pick Polluted Delta, that you don't have to be blue-black for that to be a good card. If you're one of those colors, the Delta is almost always going to end up being good, because you'll get a land to fetch with it. And if you're more than 2 colors, they can be phenomenal. The same thing with Prismatic Vista, right? Prismatic Vista is just always a good card. So those cards, yes, I'm happy to take early if there's nothing super standout because they're very non-committal, they're very open. Something like, say, a Volcanic Island, even. Very, really good land. Great if you're in blue-red, very important. But it's not a flexible card. It's not a great first pick because I need to. It's basically only going to be good if I have blue and red mana in my deck. So it's much more. It's much lower chance of ending up making the card.
Okay, awesome. And then so that's kind of like where we are in the first couple of picks, in like pick 1 and 2. We're just taking what we think is the best card out of the pack. How do things change as we then progress through our picks? Like at what point do we stop just taking the best card? Because in theory, if we have that principle, by pack 5 we could have 5 different colors, and we're on our way to train wrecking ourselves. How do we start building a coherent deck out of the picks we're making?
Yeah, so around sort of picks 3 through 5, we're going to start hopefully getting some signals. We're not going to be 100% sure at this stage what's open because draft is noisy, right? Packs can look weird, especially in Cube. It's not like booster draft. You don't have collated packs with the same number of each color, so that does make it more difficult. But you'll start to get things like, say you're drafting. I'm gonna reach for like Powered Cube because it's a analogy people know, right? Like 5th pick, you see, say, a Counterspell. That's a really good sign that blue is open. Or 5th pick, you see an Ocelot Pride. Okay, that's a really good sign that white.
When are you seeing a 5th pick Ocelot Pride, James?
Well, yeah.
But I get the point.
But you can't say just on the back of that one pack that white is open, right? Because it could have been weird. There could have been like 2 pieces of power, and then someone took a white card they thought was better. But it is a data point, and it's a very significant data point. And if we've got pack 3, pack 4, pack 5, they've all had good white cards in. Now then, when we see that off, I can say, okay, white is really where I need to be. And in fact, even if I passed for 2 white cards before, I'll feel bad about that. But you should still take the Ocelot Pride because you've got 3 decent signals that white is open. You can have decent confidence in that. Sure, maybe you passed some cards which put first your right into white. That's fine. You can. It is more important that you are reading the signals coming from your left than worrying about what you're passing to the person to your right. Because you're going to get past 2 packs from your left. It's way more important. You'll get paid off in pack 3. So, at that stage, we can move into white with a decent amount of confidence, right? This pick 3 through 5, this is where we're starting to figure out what's open. We're not locking in at this stage. And crucially, because we're prioritizing the more flexible cards, with certain... Our cards are going to go in a bunch of different decks, right? If we, even once we've identified white is open, we've not locking into any second color at all. We're still giving ourselves options down the line, but we've got some idea of where we're going in the draft, hopefully at this stage.
So we'll come on to more like archetype-specific cards, I guess, when we move on to our like higher synergy cubes. But how highly do you rate archetype-specific cards, James, in a high flexibility cube? So let's give an example here. So Tolarian Academy in the Mitgo Vintage Cube. If you saw that in that is a very strong card in the right deck. It might be so powerful that drafting around it might just be worth it. But like as an example of a archetype-specific card, it only goes in the deck with a bunch of artifacts. At what point are you taking that as a signpost at like a deck is open, or are you still kind of trying to stay open for as long as possible, and you're not kind of like 2-footing yourself into a archetype? Because I know that's something I'm quite bad at. This card is great in this deck. I think this deck is open. and then I fall into the trap of, well, the deck was open, but maybe the colors weren't open in my seat, if that makes sense. Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, for sure. So cards like Tolarian Academy are why I don't really consider something like the Mitgo Vintage Cube to be really a high flexibility cube in terms it's not, right up at that end of the spectrum, right? It's more in the middle because it has a bunch of efficient cards, but it also has a bunch of very powerful archetype-specific cards, and that's where a lot of the power is in that cube. So in terms of how you prioritize that sort of card in something like the Mitgo Vintage Cube, which is more sort of in the middle of the spectrum, very powerful card. You want to give yourselves out to get those super powerful synergy decks. If you say, I'm never going to take that card because it's not flexible enough, you will never, you're cutting yourself off from some pretty major archetypes there, right? So you should take it, but you should take it as a speculation, not as you're locking yourself in, right? If you take Tolarian Academy, say second, third pick, and then next pick there's some like really mediocre artifacts cards or a really powerful white aggro card, you should take the powerful white aggro card, You shouldn't say, right, this is what I'm doing now. I'm a Tolarian Academy deck. Look, there's a Candelabra of Tornos. Let me take it. Screw you, Ocelot. You've got to be viewing it as a speculation. Don't get attached. You gave yourself a shot at it. It's fine if it doesn't work out.
Yeah, I think this principle is really, really important. It's something I definitely see when I compare the decks that I draft with the decks that you draft, in that you tend to have a higher density of good cards. I think I tend to have more of like what this deck is trying to be, like especially in my own cubes that we draft, because I'm a sucker for, I put this in the cube, I'm going to prove that it's good type thing. But just like from a raw power level, just like the base of the generic cards in your deck is higher, and you still have and you're still able to sprinkle that synergy in as well. So yeah, it's definitely something I've just seen from snapshots of decks that we've drafted. I am definitely a sucker for. Third pick this synergy card and try and build the whole thing without really having that solid base, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a very real thing, the thing of, I built this cube, I want this package to work, no one else has done it, I'm going to make it good. I think it's a large part of why I've noticed I tend to, do much worse in cubes that I have built compared to cubes that other people have built, because I want to do the cool thing a little bit more,
Well, at time of recording, we're drafting my cube tomorrow, so I look forward to going 1-2 or 0-3.
Phenomenal news.
Marvelous. One other key thing with drafting, I guess, James, is finding the colors that are open in the draft. We talked about like reading the signals of here are some strong cards in these colors at these points in the draft. Therefore, we know those open. Kind of like that's our primary color. Kind of like how quickly are we looking to find a second color, or are we trying to put off that as long as possible?
Yeah, if you can delay that decision, it's a really, really great position to be in. So if, for example, in the example we used earlier, right, we got a bunch of good white cards in a row and we identified the white was open and we moved in. If we can get to the end of pack one and we have, say, 9 or 10 good white cards, and then, maybe we spec on some other stuff early, but we have that, we're just really deep into white. That is just such a powerful situation to be in, because any really powerful card we open in pack 2, whether it's whatever color it is, we can just take it, right? And we can say, okay, great, that can be our second color if it's open. Or anything we get past, say, because, pack 2, something different will be open. We're getting past cards by different people. We're giving ourselves the flexibility to move into what other color makes sense to us in pack 2. And we can even delay that decision into pack 3 sometimes, because if our primary color is really, really open, we end up with a deck which has, say, 17, 18 white spells in it, and then we need, 6 or 7 of our second color, and that's fine. Whatever color we move into, we can get our 6 or 7 important cards from that. And we're just giving ourselves so much flexibility to delay that decision. Because, how often are you in the draft, right? And you're like, it's pack 3, and you're like, I so should have been in this color combination. My deck would be absolutely cracked, but there's nothing I can do now because I'm too invested in the road I chose to go down early, right? And if we are very heavy into one color, then the time we realize, oh man, literally no one is in black, and I can just be black. It doesn't matter that I didn't have any black cards after pack 1. I can move in later. So that's giving you really powerful options down the line.
Okay, awesome. So we've chatted about one end of the spectrum with our high flexibility cubes. Let's talk about the other end of the spectrum. These we've labeled high synergy. So I guess it's kind of high synergy, low flexibility, if we're giving it a full title. So kind of, James, talk to us about what you would define as a high synergy cube.
Yeah, so here we're really talking about cubes where most of the cards in the cube, you have to do something to make them reach their potential, to make them into a good card. Obviously, there'll still be some, removal spells, whatever you put in any deck, but the majority of the cards are asking either to go in a specific archetype or for you to, say, have a lot of a specific card type or do something to support them other than just make however many mana of that color. So I think actually a good example of this might be your Treat Yourself cube, right? There's most cards in that they're not just necessarily just going in one deck, but they are asking you to do a little bit of work in order to make that card reach its potential, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. One thing with my Treat Yourself is it's always, the goal for it always was, I use this analogy all the time, but that it's not just A is good, A plus B is good. And I'm fine with A and B individually being lower powered leveled, but the goal is that A plus B is stronger than A and B individually, basically.
Yes, exactly. And because of that, right, the puzzle we are trying to solve here is a little bit more complicated, right? It's not just what colors are open, it's what archetypes are open, and how can I end up finding something really powerful to do, right? Because I think also the sort of gap between the decks that get there and the decks that don't get there in this sort of cube can be really, really big, right? So you need to give yourself the maximum outs to find a good engine, to find some good synergies to really make your deck tick, right? And if we took the same approach as we discussed with the high flexibility cubes, right, and we just tried to so we're just trying to solidify ourselves into one color by the end of pack 1. And that situation we said was phenomenal in a high flexibility cube. Well, in this cube, it's not going to help us that much, right? Because say we're almost mono blue after pack 1. Great. But actually, it's not great. We've not given ourselves flexibility because we'll have a bunch of blue cards that tell us to put artifacts in our deck. Some of the other blue cards will tell us to fuel our graveyard. Some of them will tell us to play instants and sorceries. They're not realistically all going to go in the same deck, right? So we've got to be thinking a little bit deeper than just establishing ourselves into colors. We've got to be establishing what sort of synergies we're going for.
Okay, nice. So in which case, how are we adapting to that, James? How are we adapting to a cube that wants you to be doing a thing more?
Yes, there's a few ways we can go here, right? We could take the approach of, okay, let's prioritize the cards that are flexible, right? Now I'm looking at your Treat Yourself cubes. We could take there's some good removal spells in here. We could prioritize out. We could say, okay, here's this Abrade, pack 1, pick 1. That goes in every deck. Great, I'll take Abrade. Then I'll take some card draw. I'll take a Fact or Fiction. Great, that goes in every deck. And
that does not sound like you treating yourself, James.
Exactly, right. And then we'll give ourselves flexibility, but we're missing out on a lot of power there, right? If that's the approach we take. So what we need to do is sort of a hybrid approach of we do that if there's nothing super powerful, but we need to be very willing to speculate on stuff. So to take the most powerful parts of the the synergistic archetypes, I think we really want to. If you see those engine cards which just aren't replaceable, right? So I think in your cube, something like Dream Halls is a really good thing to spec on early because it's really powerful when it comes together, and it's kind of unique in the cube, right? It's not replaceable in any way. There's no redundancy in that effect. So that sort of card, yeah, sure. There's a decent chance you end up, if you take that first pick, it ends up in your sideboard, right? You need some fairly specific things to come together for it to work. But if it does work, it's phenomenal. So we can take these cards. We're not committing to anything. They're purely speculative picks. But we're giving ourselves those outs down the line, right? To get into one of those really powerful synergistic lanes. And ultimately, that does unlock a lot of the power level in these cubes, right? I think if you try and take the super nuts and bolts approach here, you end up with like really mediocre mid-range trying to play a bunch of synergy cards on the fair, and you end up you don't go 0-3, but you don't win the cube, do you? You go like 1-2 because you played against 2 decks that got there and then beat the like synergy deck that really didn't get there.
Are you really living, James? Let's be honest with you. let's be honest with things.
Exactly. So I think, early on you're doing that. Is there something super powerful? Is there something worth speculating on? So I think in your cube, like Dream Halls, Displacer Kit, and maybe one of the wheels. These are the sort of things I'm looking to spec on because they're not super replaceable. So translating this to Modo Cube, be like that Tolarian Academy example, right? There's not another Tolarian Academy. You should take it early if you can see it. If there aren't good artifacts cards in the next couple of packs, you get out of that lane, you go and draft something else, right? But you're giving yourself out, and it's more important to give yourself the out of drafting the busted Tolarian Academy deck at the cost of I missed out on a lightning bolt, because there's a million other lightning bolts. Sure, they're a little bit less good, but if you have Unholy Heat instead of lightning bolt in your red deck, you're just not going to feel it that much. Whereas if you have Island instead of Tolarian Academy in your artifact deck, that is a much bigger difference.
Yeah, it's not just kind of the reason why you're drafting those cubes for doing the big cool thing, but it's also like the environment has been built with that in mind, so that's where the power is. Like to have the most powerful deck, you need to lean into the synergy when the synergy is put on the table for you.
Exactly. You've got to speculate to accumulate, I think, in these cubes.
I guess an important question at this point, James, is how do you think someone can define what type of cube they're in? How do you know that a cube has a higher flexibility and more efficient cards, or how do you know if it's if it has a higher synergy? Like is this one of those times where it's very important to have a look at the cube list and kind of see what it's packing? Yeah,
I think one thing I find the most useful if I'm going to draft a cube, I just click the, you can do the draft function on Cube Cobra and it drafts you against some bots. That's the thing. Like, obviously it's not a real draft, right? No, I don't know what the bots do. I think they pretty much just take cards at random. But for me, seeing the cards like in packs and reading through the packs is helpful for me to get an idea of how the cube is going to feel to draft, right? But the questions I'd be sort of asking is looking at those packs, being like, okay, how many of these cards are going to be good in... Just say you're looking at look at the red cards in the pack. How many of those red cards are going to be good in pretty much any red deck versus how many of them are asking to be in one specific archetype or to have one specific set of synergy. So the most synergy-based cubes, right, you look at them and you go down the list of archetypes on the page, right, and you go through and it's like blue-red wizards and green-white counters and whatever people have put in. And you look at the cards and all the cards just go into one of those buckets, right?
Yeah, every gold card is one of those cards. I get you. Yeah.
Yeah. But a ton of the monocolored cards as well are like, okay, this blue card is for blue-red wizards, and this other blue card is for blue-white artifacts, you know? Versus a cube like the agility cube, for we use an example, right? Where you go down the list of creatures and like 90% of them are just strong creatures, right? Yeah, like you run down the list of blue creatures in that cube, right? You've got like, hey, look at the 2/12. Got a Fairy Mastermind, good in pretty much any blue deck. Curial's Spell Dancer, Silent Hall Creeper, Snapcaster Mage. You know, these are very flexible cards. They'll go in a bunch of different archetypes. Like, they'll be better in some than others, but they're going to be pretty functional, pretty much regardless. And and therefore, by drafting them, you're giving yourself that flexibility.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think another thing that you can do is look at the key cards, like the bread and butter cards. So kind of like we used the example of like Lightning Bolt earlier in the episode. Like if you have a look at the red removal, if you see Lightning Bolt and don't see, and if you see Lightning Bolt in all the efficient ones, it's more likely to be in the more efficient environments. If you see some synergy piece rather than Lightning Bolt, then you have a higher then you have more of an idea you're in a synergistic environment, and that's true with like all of the staples, I would say, because they are very good flex slots where you can add some additional synergy into your cube. So I'm thinking like in white, it's like your aggressive creatures. What are they doing? Is it Ocelot Pride? Is it Guide of Souls? Or is it like Court Homunculus, for example, like the artifact aggro? It's a 1-drop that if you have an artifact is a 2/2. Marvelous. Like look at your counter magic in blue. Look at your like black doom blades or your hand attack if they're synergistic with like. Or look at your burn. Look at your green ramp. These are kind of like slots that like I use it as a cube designer all the time. Is like if I'm trying to add some synergy and turn that lever, those are places I try and look for it. So I think that's a good place to start. It doesn't mean it's always going to be that way because, as we've mentioned, or as James mentioned, the Mitgo Vintage Cube is somewhere in the middle because it also has packages, it has payoffs for being synergistic, and that's where kind of like looking at the rest of the list, saying like, oh, there's an Oath of Druids there. That's a very powerful build around, like that kind of thing. Or like in slightly lower power level cubes, like is there something like an Opposition? That's a build around card. That's more of a synergistic card rather than a raw efficiency type of thing.
Yeah, for sure. It's not really super correlated with power level, right? Like often pauper cubes, you know, obviously these spells are slightly less efficient than in a really powerful cube, but they generally fall on the high flexibility end. I find like they have a bunch of good cheap interaction and some value creatures, right? Is a lot of the core of those cubes with a few synergy pieces around the edge.
Yeah, and that does kind of make sense in environments where your pool of cards is less, where where something like Pauper or Peasant, where you're narrowing the amount of cards you can use. It's more likely you're going to play the efficient ones because you have less of a pool to do creative things with, I guess. Like it doesn't mean it's not doable. Like there will still be some cool combos and still be some cool things you can do in those environments, but it's just less of a thing. Like there's a reason why my Treat Yourself cube has rares and mythics in it, for example.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the rarity restricted ones specifically often gravitate towards that end of the spectrum, partly because the interaction is a higher power level than the proactive cards, right? Like if you're, you know, sort of quote unquote maxing out power in your Pauper cube, you know, you've got Counterspell and Lightning Bolt and stuff, but the proactive cards don't line up to that power level, right? So, and it's hard to piece together your synergies when the interaction is that strong. So often the proactive cards then start to gravitate towards stuff that plays better into the removal and the counter spells, which is like, you know, your cheap value creatures are often really important in those cubes.
Yeah, 100%. So kind of pulling back from that a moment and kind of keeping the conversation we're still looking at it through this spectrum of efficiency to synergy, that kind of thing. But talk to me about like what other benefits are there staying open for longer?
Yeah, so it very much depends on the composition of the cube you're drafting, right? One thing that can have a really big impact is if there are sort of major power outliers in the cube. That's a really big incentive to leave yourself open to playing them, regardless of when you see them, right? Let's choose Modo Cube as an example for like big power outliers in that cube, right? Obviously, things like the power, but everyone can play that. But stuff like Minsk and Boo, Forfeolingus, the fact that these cards exist and are way better than 99% of the cards around them, that's a huge reason to leave yourself open in a draft, right? Because regardless of when you see those cards, you want to be able to take them and you want to be able to play them. And that's why we talked about the importance of taking like stuff like fetch lands, which are fixing that's going to work basically whatever colors you end up in. But also just trying to invest yourself into one color, so you maybe get to delay the decision on your second color. That way, if I'm super heavy blue and I see Minsk and Boo, I can probably actually in pack 2, I can probably make that work, right? I can go either blue-green and splash red or blue-red and splash green. If I see a Psychic Frog, fine, I'll move into black. It's a little bit less important if the cube has a super flat power level, right? Then it's maybe better to take the good cards now because I don't have that possibility of getting something busted later and being punished by not being able to play it because I'm already solidly in 2 colors and not able to splash.
That makes sense. Yeah. So yeah, the Mega Vintage Cube obviously has has power outliers all over the place. It has a bunch of very strong cards, but it has those peaks and troughs basically. And I guess they kind of dovetail nicely with the conversation we had last week about me making updates to my cube, where I was taking out some of the higher power leveled cards to try and flatten that a little bit. So what you're saying is in my unpowered vintage cube, where I have tried to flatten the power level and remove or sand off the edges of the power level, make it a bit more even, it's just taking the good cards is more important.
Yeah, so I think when the power level of the cube is pretty flat, it's more okay to just be like, these 2 colors feel open, I'm going to lock myself into these 2 colors in pack 1, because I'm not going to open Minsk and Boo in pack 2 and be sad that I can't take it and play it, I'm less able to be punished. If I have a reasonable read for those 2 colors are open, fine, I can lock myself into it. The one other thing which is really useful to bear in mind if you are in a cube which has those big power outliers, it means that you almost whatever stage of the draft you're in, you might end up really wanting to splash any color, right? And with that in mind, it's really important when you get to the last few picks of the pack, the pack's winding down and you're probably not playing any of the cards. If there's like 3 cards in the pack, just take the land. Like, even if it's a land that looks really unlikely to be good for you, if the spells aren't getting there either, you do not know in these cubes, right? You end up with some weird combination of powerful cards that you want to splash, and even though you're solidly in blue-red, suddenly that shadowy back street that you passed for nothing would be really nice because you want to splash a Psychic Frog into black and a Forfeolingus into white, and hey, that land would actually sort of knit the room together quite nicely. So just when it doesn't cost you much, just spec on those off-color lands in this sort of environment because it does pay dividends down the line.
I don't know what cubes you're drafting, but in our play group, no one leaves a land late in the pack. But I definitely see in terms of when you're playing more in the wild and on Arena and Mick-Go, you're going to get a wide variety of plays. I guess because I play with the same people a lot, our play group aggressively draft their lands. I'm just flashing back to last weekend when my Doomsday deck had 1 jewel, and we were really doing our best to make it work.
It's fine. There is a Dark Ritual. Dark Ritual is all the fixing you need.
Dark Ritual and Lotus Veil, I think it was, did God's work in that deck.
Nice.
I think the last bit of the puzzle I want to touch on today is when it comes to pivoting. This is something that kind of as we've kind of drawn it up. In an ideal world, we take some powerful cards early, and then we move into the color we think is open. But there's a world where the person to our right has also noticed that that color is open, and they moved in as well. And then our color starts drying up. Or there's also the world where we have noticed that one color is open, but a completely different deck. So it's like, say we've started with like a control base or something like that, and then just the nutso aggro deck is starting to get passed to us. Like, those are some signs we're pivoting. But kind of like, what else? From a pivoting point of view, what else should we keep in mind at this, while we're drafting as a starting point on the topic of pivoting?
Yeah, I think in general people are a bit too scared to pivot, and people think it's too late when it isn't too late, you know? Cubes tend to not have a ton of bad cards in them, is the thing. And that means that if you have a correct read that a specific color pair is really where you need to be in the draft and it's wide open, then even if you're getting into it kind of late, you will likely get enough spells if you're correct that is open. It can go badly if you tried to pivot and you were wrong and it wasn't open, or someone else pivoted at the same time. But you do often get paid off for being a little bit bold, and even though it's, you know, late in pack one and you're kind of throwing away a lot of your cards, if it's better to have 2 packs of being in the right lane than 3 packs in the wrong lane, you know? So I think it is often worth taking that risk. It's a lot easier, though, if you have sort of done the things we said to try and stay flexible in the early draft, right? And you have a bunch of flexible cards, because then, you know, in the point where you say as you said, like Boros is where we need to be, right? If we're really deep into some green-black graveyard synergy deck, then pivoting to Boros is throwing away all our cards, right? Whereas if we were in black, but we just had some good black removal spells and value creatures, then maybe we can pivot into black-white, and that's a much easier pivot, or black-red, and we can still use the cards from that open color, but we're not taking the massive risk of abandoning all of our first 7 or 8 picks, right? So yeah, people always how late is too late to pivot. It's it really depends on how much flexibility you gave yourself from your earlier picks. You know?
Yeah, from what you're describing, or as you were talking, it really hit me. There is a massive difference between a hard pivot and just naturally going into your second color. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, often when I'm drafting I don't really, you know, I'm not locking into my second color until pretty late on, often mid-pack too, you know? But I have one color I know I am, and I know what sort of deck I'm trying to draft, right? If I'm trying to draft a control-y deck, and I have a bunch of blue cards, say, or I'm trying to draft a mid-range deck and have a bunch of black cards, I can pick my second color down the line, right? I might be okay, yeah, I'm a mid-range deck. I've got a bunch of black removal spells and some black threats, and I have a few blue cards, so I'll probably be blue-black. But if I see a really good red card, I can be black-red, you know?
Yeah, that tracks.
But you're giving yourself that out to pivot, right? And it's sometimes, and you know, if you're really heavy into one color, sometimes pack 3, you can change what your second color is. If you have given yourself that flexibility, that can be a really good spot to be in. But if you've been I'm all in on this one specific synergy archetype and it doesn't pan out, you then maybe have to make a pretty hard pivot, right? You then maybe have to say, I'm kind of throwing away most of my pack one and I'm going to draft something else because I don't think this deck is getting there. And that can be scary and you can train wreck, but it's probably better than trying to hang on.
I think one interesting thing that you've just kind of pulled out is in the topic of a conversation of like the different ways to draft on cubes that have a higher flexibility compared to ones that have a higher synergy. It does sound like it's easier to pivot, or it almost sounds like in a higher synergy, in a higher flexibility cube where there's just more efficient spells, a pivot isn't as much of a pivot because you're kind of just more finding your lane, finding a second color. Whereas in a higher synergy cube, you could be where you're rewarded for taking or drafting around an archetype or a package. Bailing out of that is much more of a cost. Do you think that's fair, James? So like in my Treat Yourself cube, for example, bailing out of your, like, say you first pick Dream Halls, bailing out of that deck is harder than finding a way out of a color or into another color, that kind of thing.
It certainly can be if you've invested lots of your picks in the very narrow synergy cards, right? Like, which you don't necessarily have to. Like, your Dream Halls deck still wants, like, the good blue card selection and stuff, and sometimes it's better to prioritize those cards early and be like, okay, I noticed there's a cool synergy card that might go in this deck, in this pack. I'm going to see if that wheels. I'm going to take the Ponder, because that's going to be great in any blue deck. And if that synergy card comes back, then I kind of know that I'm probably good to go in this deck. And if it doesn't, then that's probably a pretty important signal that I need to look into a different lane, right? I think so. One thing I was drafting like Powered Cube a lot is if you're like dipping your toes in Storm, something like the very Storm specific cards like Tendrils, say. I never want to take them early, but I will know that they're there, and I'll maybe spec on a few Storm cards on the way around if there's no cost to me. But then if that Tendrils doesn't come back, I'm out, Because if someone spent a real pick on Tendrils of Agony, I cannot fight for Storms. It's not a good enough deck to support two players. It's debatable if it's a good enough deck to support one player really in Powered Cube now. But if someone spent a real pick on the Tendrils, I have no interest in fighting you for it. I'm going to leave my Storm cards alone and go and draft a different deck, And it's fine because I've not like invested a bunch of really high picks in the Storm cards. I've like invested my high picks in some permission and some card draw and some removal, and maybe I spent some like later picks speculating on some Storm stuff. It didn't work out. Fine, I'll move on, I've not lost that much. I've given myself an out to draft the cool Storm deck, but I've also given myself a way out of it.
No, definitely, I get you. That does make a lot of sense. Okay, marvellous. I think that's where we're going to leave it for today. James, thank you. We are drafting my basic Boomer Cube tomorrow, so I'm going to be putting these good notes into use tomorrow, so I'm coming for that 3-0. James, thank you very much. That was really helpful.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
All right, marvellous. That just leaves me to thank you all very much for listening. Do make sure you give the podcast a 5-star review, thumbs up, all that good stuff. Greatly helps us out. Do new and cool things. Until next time, it's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from James, and we'll see you all soon. Goodbye.